Hi guys, my name is Borodante, and welcome back to Overpaint. Which means I go through my Patreon page and check out all the submissions you sent to me during May, give you some advice and try to fix something. But before we start, I have two announcements. First, this channel sponsor Wingfox has a new course, and I won't be tired of promoting it because I'm waiting it like crazy. Exquisite illustration tutorial for trading card game design. This is a course by a Chinese concept artist that goes by the name Nemo, and I'm a huge fan of his skill and art style, and especially the fact that he learned directly from Ruan Jia, my favorite digital artist, which I noticed really changed a couple of their latest artwork, and I'm dying to know what they have to share. During the course, Nemo will be working on this artwork that you're seeing, and they will cover the full process, starting with observation, coloring, lighting, covering sketching, then all kinds of search and design, and all kinds of stuff, background, and finally actual painting, rendering, and refinement. A full package, really excited to see it. The course will start releasing in 40 days, as you can see right here. Right now, it's in the fundraising stage, and this stage will only last for the next 10 days. After that, the actual translation period starts, and then the course will cost $69. So it's a good time to purchase the course right now. It will grant you the full access when the course actually comes out. If any of you guys are interested, the affiliate link is in the description as always. And don't miss out on the mid-year sale event on Wingfox, with courses having up to 80% discounts. And now to the second announcement, which is my mentorship. I literally will be publishing this mentorship literally the time the video will be published. And yeah, actually there will be a couple of changes. I haven't changed that yet, but you will see those changes. It's still gonna be 3 students, but in here, it won't be on one of your paintings anymore. Like, it's not gonna be the mentorship where we just start and finish one of your pieces, and no one really did that. So I changed the whole course a little bit. Now it's gonna be just full month whenever you start, by the way, so don't bother checking the calendar or whatever. Whenever you start, and then 30 days, whatever pieces or studies, maybe I'll recommend you to do some studies, which is a common practice, combining different art styles and stuff like that. Very interesting experiments that will really improve your skill. That was a lot of fun that we did in the first month. So yeah, 3 students, whoever you are, go ahead and subscribe. We'll have a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll learn a lot from each other. That's usually the way it goes. Now finally for the overpaint. First patient, Ben Gibson. Welcome Ben. Welcome Ben back. Welcome back, Ben. I had fun with your submission last month, and this was actually posted by Ben literally on May 1st, which is pretty much like in-game view of the same character in the same universe of that key shot splash art thing that we reviewed in the previous overpaint. Hi again, Boro. Here's my submission for May's Overpaint. I made this painting as a concept for a theoretical top-down game. You'll notice it's the same character as my last submission. Yes, this is another piece that I'm happy with overall, but would love your input and critique. So let's see what I have to say. Alright, Ben. Really liking the look. Very interesting, even without the consideration of this being a concept for a game. I just sometimes feel like it would be cool to just paint a picture like that. One thing though, in terms of like if this is a concept for a game, not quite sure how the camera would work between these really tall trees. But yeah, that's just one thing. Maybe you'll find a way. So yeah, I have no problems with the composition or with the overall gamut of the picture. I think everything's just fine. Even the contrast and stuff like that seems just great. I would maybe increase the lighting contrast in some areas, but you know, it may increase like the mood of it, but honestly it's pretty moody as it is. Yeah, one thing that I noticed right away was this really blurry digital shadow under the character. And again, I have to think about like what if this would be a game. In games they actually have this really cool technique lately that I really like, where separate parts of the body, like a foot, then the bottom half of the leg, the top half of the leg, the torso, the parts of the hands and the head, they all cast shadows kind of like independently. And with that, they make sure that the foot casts the most sharp shadow, this part would be a bit blurrier, and the further up we go, the blurrier the shadow is, and the head's shadow is the most diffused one. That's a really cool look, and it's like it works just fine with characters not really doing a barrel roll or anything. Or even if they do, I think it's not a problem. The point is that, yeah, I would just work a bit on making the shadow a bit more complex and a bit sharper next to the legs. And maybe let in some of the light like that in between to actually show certain consideration for the actual shape of the body. So yeah, something like that instead of this. We have a certain like connection between the feet as they are the closest to the floor. Looks a bit more natural. So yeah, the other stuff, I would add some shadows under the details maybe. I think it makes sense even in games. So yeah, these big mushrooms could really cast some of that. I also feel like this perfectly straight root right here feels a bit unpleasant. I mean, it's wavy, but it's only wavy vertically, but from the perfectly top view, it's like a line. So yeah, maybe think about adding some variation, because it feels really weird, like why is it so perfect? Also, the shadow from this root right here, it feels like it was drawn more from a side than from the top, and we're like midway, so the shadow shouldn't, like, we shouldn't see that gap of light behind the root. I think it should be only the shadow spot at the bottom. Funny how this root looks brown in here, in this location, but really this color is blue. Funny how colors work, huh? I mean, all the colors are just relative to each other, so it totally makes sense. We're in a very cold gamut in here. It totally makes sense that brown would really be just a desaturated blue. And yeah, overall, I think everything's just fine. Couple more things, again, is just in the details. I think this stone right here, this piece of this structure, it's really like rubber. It seems to be deformed, like if it's tilted, let it really be tilted with its full shape. So this kind of stuff needs to be more precise and consistent. Another thing is like this broken corner, like where does the breakage start? You know, you gotta show the difference in values in that area. Otherwise, it really feels kind of undefined. And finally, the roof, it's really non-symmetrical. Like you can see how the roof is really covering this decorative thing right here. But in here we have so much distance. And like really taking a look at it, it feels like this should be going on very differently. So yeah, something like this. As I said, not a lot of stuff to change in here from my perspective. Right now I'm just justifying this weird tilt of the stone. It feels like it needs to be a bit broken to be able to stick with that angle. And so, after spending a little bit of time, I ended up with doing these changes. Not a lot of stuff, really. I appreciated the picture as it is. Overall, I would recommend to work more with values and avoid using like outlines. I can still see like many details are kind of line based. And instead of that, I recommend really working with a higher contrast lighting, so the top-down direction of the lighting, or increasing the contrast the way I had it in here. In here you didn't have any outlines, and when I just added stronger value work, the definition of the geometry turned out to be much more specific and clear without the usage of any outlines. That's like number one thing that everyone needs to go through. Yeah, here's the process, by the way, even though there wasn't a lot to it. As you can see right here, I replaced these black outlines with actual lighting from that side. So those planes that look away from us, they look at the blue light source, so they will be brighter than whatever's going on facing upwards. And that's it. If you understand that and define those planes, you don't need these dark outlines. So this looks like a drawing. Well, this looks more like a painting. Again, it's like a quick adaptation, but you get the point, I hope. And yeah, I think this just takes a trained eye to see that this kind of perfectly blurred, soft shadow from the character, just something really unpleasant about it. You want to remove it and make it more complex and realistic. So yeah, that's one of the things. Next, Patient. Ilva Winter. Welcome back, Ilva. Hello, hello. Here we go again. I struggled a lot with the lighting in this piece. I wasn't sure how bright the windows should be to still light up the creature this way. Yeah, by the way, the lighting in the picture is really challenging. Also, the concept of the creature itself is kind of all over the place. I wanted to capture the moment of taking the first breath and looking outside the window into the new world. Basically, the creature was just summoned, hence the rune magic ring around the pool of blood. Its arms are the tentacles in the water. I really struggle with drawing creepy stuff and I wanted to try it out. So this is it. Yeah, this was a very interesting thing to witness. I remember your previous submission last month was a lot more confident, in a way, I think. That's the good word. So let's see what I could improve about this. Okay, Elva, one thing I want to fix there right away is actually the pose of the creature. I feel like the body, like all of this part, it kind of dictates the motion of, the head being tilted downwards and the pose being like that, like fallen down. But then instead of that, we have the head that's sticking upwards. So it's a weird dynamics. I would go for something a bit different in order to make the head work, and therefore to have a more readable pose. And another thing, which is something I'll do in the, after I'll do the new pose, I can see there's two light sources in here. The red, perfectly red glow of whatever the liquid or the cracks. And the second is the windows. And the windows are at the top. So for instance, this color right here, it couldn't happen here, At the bottom, there should be only the red light, and at the top, only the white light, like mostly the white light. So it's kind of confusing, and it doesn't really translate the mood that the location should have onto the surface of the creature. So I feel like the lighting could be a bit more dramatic in here. I'm gonna just assume that there is no red light coming from over here, therefore we'll have like a dark spot in the center, which will look pretty cool for the dramatic and mysterious look of this hellish creature. So yeah, these are the two things. Aside of that, I would work maybe a bit on the brushwork and the way different lights blend one on top of the other. This feels like this red color was painted on top of the god rays, which is kind of weird. That's why it's sort of breaking the feeling of things being real in here. I could spend time describing how the color should have been paler and whiter because of the overlapping fog, but really just paint the fog on top and you won't have to think about it, This is the kind of color that would appear, but without necessarily having to make the fog stronger. So if we would start over, it would look a bit better with that. And yeah, generally with the lighting, I always say that if you have two lights, you gotta choose the main one. And in this case, I think the main one should be the windows. The red glow of these cracks, I don't think it should be that dominant, considering especially that this is a absolutely saturated light, so it probably should be dimmer. So overall, I would say the red glow shouldn't be so incredibly bright. Maybe I would tone it down a bit. This way we may, not lose the silhouette of the character sometimes, although it's not really a problem here, I think. But yeah, you see, even without changing the pose, as I'm making certain areas darker and this high contrast light, like the rim lighting on the side, it really makes the mood on this head looking much more intense than in the original. So I spent a little bit more time with the artwork and I went from this to this. Oh wow, I forgot how striking it became. Yeah, I don't know, maybe I changed the concept a little bit too much, but I felt like the concept was a bit, not really taking a solid, consistent direction. That's usually, especially with a horror and with these, dim lights over there, It was an obvious choice to make the creature darker and mostly rely on the reflectivity on the edges of this moist creature, so it turned out really cool with that. And as you can see, I pretty much removed the red glow because it really doesn't make a lot of sense to add such a bright glow of red everywhere. If you can see in the picture just pure red, and not red halo with white center, the way lightsabers work in Star Wars. If it's just pure red in the final picture, it means it's not that bright. And that means the lit surfaces by that light would be a lot darker than just red. So it only made sense to just remove that a lot and just leave subtle hints on the geometry here and there to just support the whole situation so the character would blend in well. And yeah, I worked a little bit more on the ripples in the water. I feel like, I remember recently I read something, one of the most important things in drawing, when it's like what stands out as a good drawing, is when you take good care about connections of anything. You draw a neck, how exactly it changes into the head, you know? Where exactly are the places of contact? If the hand is in the water, how exactly the water is rippling around. You kind of did that, I'm not denying that, but like more feeling of connection between two things really makes it like live, you know? That's a good word, I think, when it lives. And this creature sure as hell lives. Yeah, so I went for a darker overall shape of the character with a strong reveal of lots of details using reflectivity and increased a little bit the volumetric, like the fog in the back, just a little bit, to have a strong silhouette of the character. Now you can really see it. And here's the process real quick, so I immediately changed the pose a little bit, or really like the shape of the anatomy of the torso. At first I actually defined an elbow, but then I realized, as you said, this is a tentacle, so I changed it to not have an elbow, but still have this kind of expression of some kind of skinny, weak creature that just came to be. And yeah, I made the environment darker, placed in some volumetric, added more reflections, and pretty much that was the main thing I added. Worked out pretty well. Next patient, Florencia Diaz Sierra. Beautiful. Hi Florencia. Hey there, my name is Florencia. I'm a graphic designer from Argentina, and I'm struggling to get back into drawing. This is one of the last things I made, Israel from LOL, League of Legends. I tried to pay attention to the lighting and use techniques I learned from your channel, but I'm sure you'll be able to fix it. My main issues with this painting are the tattoos on his face. Don't know how to make them realistic. Some shadows lightening, the hair, and maybe the clothes, glasses, but I wasn't focusing on that. Alright, let's take a look. Alright, Florencia. Well, this picture is put together pretty well. I don't have a lot of problems with it in any challenges that it was chosen to take. While there are some issues with the shading and with the colors that were chosen for it. And yeah, we'll see what we can do about the tattoos. But overall, I feel like this artwork's ceiling of how good it can get is all about the fact that this is a pretty tight copy of a photo. That's at least what I feel like it is. It's hard for me to imagine for someone to paint this kind of face out of their head, and so it would be so tightly visualized. So yeah, I'm pretty sure a reference was used. And the character, by the way, generally I think many people already thought that. The character really looks a lot like someone from Star Wars, which is interesting. So I looked up a couple of references of the character, and in all the cases they usually look a lot more, well, stylized and, you know, not so hyper-realistic with a certain, well, actual character to the appearance. I'll go ahead and try to do that using my favorite word of the last 2 weeks, which is shape design. So I'll try to apply some dynamics and maybe think more about the actual three-dimensional shape, especially including hair, and applying the lighting that you started with the face in here. And that was something you did, I assume. Specifically, it wasn't in the reference. And I'll try to make it, you know, work on the hair as well. And yeah, generally thinking through the shapes in terms of like actually understanding the three-dimensional feeling of the object, so we would have a bit of a more interesting rendering. Like in this case, you see all of this was facing the same direction, which is not the case. It's curving away, and because of that, it should be changing its color a lot. So that kind of logic, I'll see how I'll be able to do it. And overall, the shape design of the hair, I looked up this curtains hairstyle, and yeah, I'll see how I'll be able to apply that as well, looking for specific shapes to make sense out of it. Well, you also defined the shapes from whatever the reference you had, but I feel like you made them into like these round shapes and that's it, and because of that, they sort of don't make real sense when they are visualized like that. So yeah, again, I'll just see what I can do about that, trying to make sure I have this consistent brushwork and dynamics, translating the shapes that you want to show into something that would be more than just a copy of a photo, but actually bring the way you feel about this shape, the way what it's supposed to mean. And yeah, some of the stuff on the shading, I'll see how I can work in here in terms of adding just these blue spots on the nose when it's bright on its own. It doesn't really work. It doesn't, like, those colors don't even work together. It feels wrong to add so much blue when it's actually darker than what the nose was before it. And that's not the way lighting works. If the light can't make the surface brighter, then it just doesn't show up. It doesn't make the surface darker. So yeah, this was a mistake. If you want to show the light, if you think that the plane of the nose actually faces the blue side where the light could hit it, it should become dark enough. It can't not become that, because if it's facing where the blue light is, it's absolutely not facing where the white light is. Differently lit sides with the presence of Terminator, they never blend together because it's literally impossible. They exclude each other, so you gotta make sure. I understand it was probably really hard to achieve considering generally repeating the shape of the reference was really hard, and then changing so much about the lighting, literally in the middle of the face, was probably something that was really hard to achieve. For that, you need to make sure you analyze not just the flat spots of the character, but actually analyzing three-dimensionally where each angle of the surface is, you know? This way you'll be able to not copy the flat image, but copy the three-dimensional shape of your reference. And when you have three-dimensional shapes, you can light them any way you want. And if you put the light on the right side, you will be able to easily shade down the side that doesn't face that direction and all of that. So after that, I kind of went ambitious with this piece and spent a little bit too much time with it, and it didn't help. I kind of messed it up. So I went from this to this. And it's really weird. Like, it feels like I would have to spend another hour at least to really, you know, bring that touch to make the face alive at all. But still, like, even though I haven't really added that touch to make the character look a bit more real, especially in the eyes, they're kind of dead. I think this is one part that I didn't work on enough, but I had to stop. It was too long. Yeah, overall, I just reworked the lighting, really thinking through. I think I kind of changed it a lot. And here, I didn't really get the point of, like, it's completely from the side as I see it now when I compare it. And in my case, I kind of made it as sunlight. I know, and I was using references of, like, real hair of this kind, the split kind of hair, and well, I don't know, this design is questionable as well. But one thing I really wanted to improve, and I hope I managed to do that, is generally the harmony between the lighting, like this blue sci-fi lighting and the other lighting. And in here it feels a lot more like something that truly happens in the geometry of this world, and in here it felt like an afterthought. And like this just dark spot of blue was really a bad call, I think. So I tried to make it really work as the lighting that hits from the side. It's always kind of hard actually to paint over a portrait, trying to like fix it, because like you're seeing the face that's changing all the time, it would be literally easier to start from scratch. But yeah, I just pretty much started blocking in the new colors, new values that I wanted to see. Overall, I just feel like the brushwork really went a bit too harsh, and most importantly, it doesn't look anything like the original, so it really feels weird, like in a weird place. Oh, also a little bit of a note on actual thing that you asked about is the tattoo, right? So yeah, honestly, if you're working in digital, use the blending modes, because specifically for tattoos, graffiti, any kind of redness of the skin, like variation of the color in the skin, this stuff is so easy to make in digital and actually make it look like a flat drawing on the surface, you know? Just use a multiply mode in a layer, like separate layer, and just draw whatever you want. If it looks kind of digital and disconnected, then merge it together and then work on that brushwork a little bit to make it blend in if you really feel like it's necessary. One thing to keep in mind, don't apply highlights before adding the tattoo. Highlights shouldn't be colorized by the tattoo, that's what I'm trying to say. So I actually didn't really even do the highlights in here at all, in whatever stage I left the artwork. But right now, like after applying the tattoo, in a separate layer, I would be adding the actual highlight on top. And you see now it really blends in well, because you can see how the colors were affected all correctly by the multiply mode, because it's altering the color without altering the values. The shadow goes exactly the way it went without the tattoo. And that's exactly the way tattoos should look like. But the highlights go on top, altering not just the color of the skin, but also the color of tattoo. That's one important little thing to keep in mind. Next patient. Sketch Monster. Hi Sketch. Quite an epic scene right here from the Attack on Titan, I think. Only watched the first episode of that show. Struggling on rendering when it's all seemingly in shadow. That's a good way to put it. And I'm wondering if I'm going in the right direction or not. Well, you totally are, but I had some tricks up my sleeve. Let's see how that went. Alright, Sketch Monster, so you mentioned most of it should be like in the shadow, which is an interesting point. I can see you were struggling with like finding a good contrast to show things that are important, while also like working with aerial perspective maybe or something. So I want to try something, and I think we need to stop trying to force these volumetrics in here or whatever, and actually get the pretty dark mountains in here, because they are like a part of this whole horror that's going on to our hero at the bottom there. So I think it's an important message, so it will only work for our benefit. And I'll go ahead and remove this really strong, like completely blown out rim light, and we'll see, maybe I'll add a much more toned down version of it. I'm not sure what kind of design his outfit is in there, but he seems to be pretty well armored. Also, I was wondering, I hope I won't like ruin some kind of striking gradient in here, but I feel like we could make the sky maybe not as high contrast. Although I'm really not sure about it, because this way it makes the whole scene less intimidating. So maybe a little bit, just to keep that, you know, actual silhouette of what's going on. So after a little while, I went from this to this. Pretty much, I embraced the idea of everything being in the dark, and I made the actual mountains much darker, so they feel a lot more ominous, and I made the sky brighter than these mountains. That's the important, the key change. That it actually feels like it's the dark thing. In here, it's kind of weird, like you're not sure, like, is this the sky or what? I'm actually not 100% myself, because I don't know. But yeah, hopefully this is the sky, and then this makes a bit more sense. And of course, I adapted the shading on the face. The shadow part is exactly in the front from the back. So we emphasize the fact that this is the dark place. This is how we're pushing at the viewer, at our little protagonist right here. And yeah, the protagonist as well, I really don't think they needed this really strong rim light. I don't think it worked out well, even in terms of like just supporting the silhouette of the character doesn't really work, I think. In this situation, if you zoom out or like look from afar, it doesn't it doesn't read that well. And also I replaced the birds a little bit so they would give more of a flow, because in here this bird is really like the character's hitting with their face into the bird, and this way it feels a lot more organic, like the eye goes from the character through the birds and to the giant. Also, I added a little bit of the more aggressive spikes in the sky. I don't know why, I felt like they needed a bit of a different, more definitive brushwork. And yeah, aside from that, just more falling bits from the mountains and stuff like that. Not necessary, but I really felt like the initial ones, while they were the stylish little like splatter of some kind of different medium, like the texture of the paint spots, it really, it didn't really read like the dynamic something that's falling, and I added a bit of a bigger, more defined pieces. Next patient is Lil Dagger Art. Hi, Lil Dagger. Hey Boro, don't mean to brag, but I've been watching your stuff since 2019, and you're literally my favorite artist. Thanks, that's very nice. 2 years, that's a lot of favorite artist. Pretty much I've just been severely demotivated to paint for a year until recently. I found that the subject of the painting just gets me more motivated. This is a portraiture of one of my favorite musicians artists named Sixththhh. I hope that's the way to pronounce that. And honestly, it looks oddly uncanny and doesn't even look like him. Sorry that it's unfinished, like the tattoos in the bottom half. I'm just the kind of artist that can't progress too much if I see a major problem with the painting. And major problem there was, but it wasn't that hard to fix. So let's take a look. Alright, Lil Dagger. Well, I actually don't see a lot of problems with this artwork that would necessarily stop you from finishing it, except for just a few proportion issues. So what I did here, I drew this kind of line, so eyebrows, the top of the forehead, and the bottom of the chin, and I copied and pasted the same line in here on the photo. And as you can see, the eyebrows in the original are much higher than the line, but I don't think you need to push the eyebrows higher. I think you need to make the forehead a bit shorter. So it would be more like this in the original, so that's where the forehead would end. But the main issue here is actually not these proportions, because they're really close. One problem is something that I actually notice a lot in the submissions that you guys send to me whenever you do some kind of photo study or something from your head. Like, this distance is incredibly huge in here, while in the original this is a very short distance between the glasses and the forehead. So you make the hair really long, and what we have in the photo is actually a shot from the bottom a little bit. That's why we also have the line of the ear. You see the ear ends or starts, the top edge of the ear is actually considerably below the eyes. And in your case, you stretched that eye to be above the eyes. And that's why the ear is actually looking pretty big comparing to what it should be. And yeah, you can see like this angle in the original is a lot more flat, and that's exactly what you stretched. Like, it should have been kind of like that, and a bit more accurate in here as well, like something like this. So yeah, that's about the proportions. Another thing is, of course, I'm gonna call it something that you would do yourself if you would actually finish the piece. Like, you defined pretty good planes of light and shadow, so to speak, but you didn't apply like further, more subtle gradients that should have taken place, you know? And that's why it looks a bit like flattened. But really, I think you know that. Just make sure you do it, that's all. And yeah, aside from that, I don't see a whole lot of issues, since this is like a study from a photo. To prevent this kind of stuff from happening, like really making the head a lot longer, make sure you do a good structure of the head before you move on with detailing it or anything like that. So just a quick sketch defining a good cranial part is gonna be somewhat like that. I'm positioning it based on like the width of the head plus the location of the eyebrows, because eyebrows need to be like in the center line of this cranial part, but we're looking from the bottom a little bit, so it's gonna be even like higher than that. And also the cranial part is being cut off a little bit on the sides, so it's like flattened a little bit here and there, and that's how we get exactly into the width of the head. And in here, this plane on the side, we cut it in 4, and this angle shouldn't be as strong, of course. There, I actually copied it and fixed it with the original. The angle in here is much stronger, plus the curvature in the frontal part of the sphere is also more noticeable because the angle is stronger, meaning the angle from the bottom. And that's why the ear is so much lower than the level of the eyebrows, because usually if we look from the front, the cranial part, like here's the eyebrows, in here that's the top point of the ear usually. But when we rotate the thing, looking at it at the bottom, this curvature makes the ear a lot lower. So pretty much that's where the ear will be. And then making this line from the bottom of the circle on the side, that's where the bottom point of the nose is. And pretty much these are the main basic things that you need to make sure you follow. Then of course make sure you do the proper sizes of these little parts in here, the distances between the eyes and the nose and how wide this area is. So yeah, I'll go ahead and try to fix it as much as I can, although painting over is quite a nightmare to try and fix proportions of the head, but we'll see how it turns out. And so after a little while, I went from this to this. So yeah, the main issue of having, like right now you can see it like an animation, how the forehead is really stretching upwards quite a lot. So really, my main advice, whenever you go with a portrait, like with details, you will be able to like eyeball it and move things around to actually make it work, like use your judgment and fix things into proper shapes, but you need to have a proper base. So make sure the basic proportions and really define the proper angle. I noticed you didn't do at all the chin from the bottom that the original, like the photo has. And that resulted in a very weird shape, like a cutout. Someone's wearing a cardboard mask of the triple extentaceous. So yeah, and fixing the angles, you can see your ears are at different levels, even like without considering just the different angle of the face and all. So yeah, when I moved things to a proper position, everything made a lot more sense. And from there, I just went with more accurate and subtle work on the values, making sure I repeat the subtle changes, like in the eyes and in that damn smile. Like the subtle smile thing, it's really interesting when you like study portraits. The way human expressions are really subtle, it's really interesting. Really interesting to repeat that, you know, to see what it really takes to make it work. Actually, during the process, it was kind of hard to fight something about the mouth I did that made it look like this. Like sassy kind of duck face. And like, you see, it's right here. I moved it upwards a little bit because the upper lip is shorter in the photo comparing. There it is, it's even more right now. And like, it was due to the like stronger shadow at the bottom that I did that actually made that expression happen. But yeah, in the end, I think I sort of kind of made it work, although still a little bit of that is still there. Next patient, Yushi, I suppose. Hi Yushi. Hi Boro, thanks for all the videos you shared and all the tips you gave me on painting. This piece is the result of learning from you and Ruan Jia. It's a post-apocalyptic style character with a rifle holding in her hand. Is that the way to say it? Holding a rifle in her hand. That's the way I know things work. The two most struggling issues for me when I was working on this art, first is that I couldn't find the balance on which part of the image I should focus on, so I started detailing everything and end up feeling exhausted and gave up on the hands, rifle, and the background. Second problem is that I spent so much time fixing the character's structure, but it still feels a bit off. Alright, well, this looks really exciting, isn't it? Let's see how I managed to improve that. As in fixing the exciting part. I think the main issue you have in here is that you haven't really decided on the lighting direction. Like, I can see it on the surface, that's a crappy color. Like, there's a strong rim lighting, but in here it doesn't get in at all. And mostly what we see is just ambient light. But you made this ambient light so omnidirectional that there's like no way to define any kind of depth in the image. Like, why is this all the same brightness? So I think we need to make like a stronger contrast for the lighting. I would go ahead and make like the inside of the cape this dark, since it's like a huge cavity in a way, and it's looking downwards. And that already will bring a lot stronger depth to the whole image. And this glove right here, if it's disappearing, just make it even darker. Why not? And yeah, another thing, I would go with a bit of a higher contrast on like generally shading things. Generally, if you don't know where to decide, like where to get that contrast, because like everything is like, this is some kind of desert or something, ruins of some kind of city, looks kind of like the Near Automata, if that's the way to pronounce it, that kind of universe. No clue how to say that. But yeah, like some kind of desert where everything's just super pale and white and whatever. Still, you can choose like one side to be darker. And yeah, of course, don't leave the cape completely flat, make it like a gradient, because everything deserves a gradient. And think on like the shading of each body part a little bit, like rethink the ambience of each part. Like this hand is like covered with the cape on the whole right side. So even though there's no like direct strong shadow from the cape, but it will still narrow down the ambient light. It won't be so all over the place, it will be mostly from the front, because on all the other sides there's darkness going on. So it will look more like this, you know? Now it kind of looks like it's inside of that cavity. And we can just keep going with doing the same thing for the rest of the body. And generally think about it this way, you know, no matter how bright the environment is, it's never as bright as the sky, because the environment is lit by the sky. It by definition will be reflecting less light than it receives from the sky. And that means that the lighting from the bottom will always be darker than the lighting from the top, from the actual sky. And you can use that logic and increase it a little bit to your advantage to make sure that you shade things properly. All the shapes that are like when they're facing downwards, I think we're gonna see more of the armpit in here from the bottom, because we're seeing it like from the bottom. It feels like the body ended a bit too quickly there. So I'm gonna add it like this a little bit. Alright, so after a little while, I ended up going from this to this. So I literally almost haven't touched anything. I just applied deeper shadows, deeper reflections, while we could think about like adding maybe translucency if there's like, we think about the rim light hitting from the bags, then maybe in here we would use like a really saturated color of the cloth being translucent. But that's the kind of stuff that's really good to add now, after you define a good high contrast shading. As well as like the stuff with the hair that I did, like generally it's lit brightly, so it's a bright pale color, but somewhere on the edges in the translucency areas I added a really saturated pink color, and it's looking kinda awesome. That's one important thing about shading. If you want to introduce rich, beautiful colors and fill the image with beautiful magical lighting the way Ruan Jia does, well, I'm not gonna be talking for Ruan Jia's methods specifically, because I'm not painting like him, I'm painting the way I paint. But I really think that if you want to introduce rich, beautiful colors and beautiful effects like overexposure giving beautiful gradients like flamey colors or translucency, all of that really works well if you define the high contrast of lighting. So in here, since we have this really dark part of the hood, I could add that translucency. In here, since the hair is overall dark, I was able to introduce this really saturated pink going from bright to really dark. and so on. Like, you can go with that a lot. Because I darkened the metal in here, I was able to introduce the reflection of the skin here, here, and here, and it's looking really cool, like actual reflection and all that. And like, needless to say that it just makes the picture a lot more real, just realistic and three-dimensional a lot. Like, this is crazy how more three-dimensional everything looks if you define the shading, like really go with deep shadows where they're due. So yeah, aside from that, while I was working on all of that, I was using my flat brush, so I introduced this very different type of brushwork, blocking in the geometry. Always work with planes. That way you will never have this issue of overworking some details and then not knowing what to do with the rest of it. First, solve all the planes. With a good, solid, and confident brushwork, that's something you really need to work on. That way it will never be a problem to have like the spread of details. It's like a part of the brushwork to know how to put all the details on and make sure it makes sense, even though you don't define every little pixel with some kind of scratch on the surface of the metal or something, you know? You can really work with it if you embrace the idea that the shapes need to be stylized and the brushwork needs to define something more than just perfectly copying the reality. Next patient is Carly Walker. Hi Carly. Hello Boro. Recently I've been binge watching all of your videos, trying to learn after being in an art rut for so long. I ended up sticking with grayscale because I had restarted so many times with color. At a certain point, my colors get muddy and my values don't seem correct. I was trying to really focus on lighting and planes of the face, but I'm still finding it challenging. I'm sure it will just take time and practice. Yeah, you seem to have a lot of thoughts. I'm not sure if I addressed all of them, but let's see how it went. Hey, Carly Walker. The image looks really cool. I really don't have a lot of problems with it. The only thing is, when I look at it from a distance, the girl doesn't feel like the most important part in the picture. This is like a very high contrast element that's taking away a lot of attention. I would maybe risk and try to tone it down a bit. Yeah, like this is already much better, I think. Maybe I would add like just a tiny bit. Let's just imagine that the sunlight only hits a very small portion of it. So the sun is actually going from that direction, like the way it hits the character. Maybe we could like catch that light a little bit with just the tips of these masses. Another thing is, I find the shading on the hand really weird, like it looks very bony and like it's from someone else. Also, it's kind of too small, so let's start with that. Comparing to the face, it's pretty tiny. And I think that's one of the reasons why it gives the illusion that this shoulder right here is too long. When I don't think it's too long, I think it's just that this woman is turned around, so the shoulders are like located like this, and that's why the whole thing looks very narrow, and then the head feels really big, but we need to support it with other things, like for instance the hand should be of the kind of size that would, like if we would make like a flat pose for the hand, it would cover the face like this, from the bottom of the chin to the very top of the forehead. And I think this kind of hand is more capable to do that than this one. This one would be like this, probably. And this way it kind of supports the idea that, hey, the head is not too big, everything's fine, it's just that the torso is rotated like that. And yeah, another thing on the shading, I think we need to make like this plane, like the outer side of the palm, it's really like at a pretty strong angle all together. So we need to have this this reflection, this reflection, this reflection. It will be going on across the whole palm right here. And when we turn towards the camera, that's where the shadow part is. And we shouldn't introduce these really bright colors the way it is in this little part, that knuckle. So yeah, a bit darker colors would work much better, I think. You see, it immediately feels like the actual proper angle of this hand. Now, the rest, really, I don't see a lot of problems with the picture. I feel like it was like there was a lot of photo reference taking part in this. So I'm not sure if it makes sense to even talk about it. Like, it's possible to have that kind of shading on the shoulder and everything, but if I would be going like just out of my head, I would go with more of a basic kind of shading. So the bottom would be just made darker, but really I don't even think I'm improving anything right now. Also, I find it very improbable that the rim lighting would be happening on one side and no contour hairs would at all catch that rim light even on the other side. It seems like it's always like absolutely 100% gonna happen if we like have a rim lighting on someone with a lot of fluffy hair. A lot of the times you would see a picture that looks totally fine and all, but then if you pay attention to the way the rim lighting is highlighting the hair, it just looks like this all over the place. There's just so much of those stray hairs going on, so you can really go crazy with it. I mean, one could argue that her hair should be like wet, but it really doesn't seem wet on the right side. Like, there are pretty dry and normal hairs around. She definitely didn't get in the water completely yet, even once, so she just came here or something. And I think it will kind of support the silhouette of the character a bit better, which is something we also kind of need. And yeah, generally, if we would go with colors, I would make sure that I use the chromatic contrast as well to support the character, to increase the character's visibility. So she should be like of a very different color from the rest of the scene. Probably kind of green, right? Then we'd go with the pink cherry blossom. I'm not gonna do like a detailed coloring, of course, because colorizing a fully detailed black and white image is a nightmare. Like, it's possible, but it's really more like, if you really want to colorize it well, you will be pretty much repainting a lot of things. So in the end, I went from this to this, and yeah, pretty much I was like colorizing the whole picture afterwards, but yeah, the colors in the end are kind of gross. It's better to look at it in black and white still, I think, but yeah, I think the fix in the size of the palm, some rim lighting, and toning down the values on that part to decrease the contrast of that mess, like really high contrast area. It kind of attracts more attention to the character. I realize I haven't really addressed the whole thing with like colors getting muddy when you try to shade things in color. My main advice is to just do some studies in color, but I really feel like this character right here was made using references, so I guess you're already doing that. Really, the main thing is try to pay attention to how the color changes in the shadow. But really, no matter what kind of color you choose, it may still look muddy if you make too much shadows. Sometimes you go dark too quick, and it's kind of a wrong thing. Darker shadows happen only at a very contact areas, just a little bit. They're really sharp and small areas. And overall, it's a very subtle change in the value. Usually, unless there is a high contrast lighting the way I have on my face right now. Next patient. Justin Bird. Hi, Justin. Hello, Borrow. My name is Justin. I'm pretty new to your channel as a whole, but it's been very helpful to me so far, so thank you. Thanks, happy to help. This is my attempt at an odd self-portrait and is the most time I've spent working on a painting. I'm still very new to painting as a whole, so any and all criticism is appreciated. Well, this piece looks like a lot of fun. Let's see what I could improve about it. Alright, Justin, this is quite a fun looking self-portrait. I'll get rid of this really weird cropping though, if you don't mind, because it seems kind of weird. I think it's okay to just go ahead and go with a symmetrical, almost symmetrical kind of look. Also, I'm feeling like extending this hand appropriately. So yeah, I don't have a lot to say about many things in here. This painting is not... It doesn't really feel like a finished product, maybe. The fact that it's just on such a black background and everything. What I really want to do is just to focus on shading the lighting a bit more elaborately. since we have this black environment to make it probably kind of scary or whatever, I would embrace that and make the shading a lot more intense. So if the surface is facing upwards, in this case it will be almost completely black. Now, if we don't want to lose the silhouette of the hat and everything, we can come up with some kind of rim lighting the way we had in here. But with rim lighting, I would recommend going immediately with a paler color, because rim lighting is usually looking paler because it's mostly a reflection, a Fresnel reflection, instead of actual shading. It's a much stronger effect than the shading in this case. So I'd go ahead and immediately make it like that. And yeah, whenever the fingers are so close to each other, I can't see how the light would enter, like reach this finger from the bottom in here. There obviously, like, there's no space between the fingers. So this feels weird, like the shading in video games, you know, where they don't cast shadows for small details like fingers, so they're all shaded as if no fingers are right next to the one that's being shaded. So yeah, I would really just go ahead and do a whole bunch of that. Higher contrast, I feel like it will really benefit this picture because it has just a lot of flash. We just have to make the most of it, you know? Like, I don't know, I don't think there's any meaning in talking about like how to shade this or that. You probably had like a perfect reference for it. So whatever I'll say is like, well, the reference had it differently and it's totally legit. So mostly what I feel like talking about is just the way the picture in the end would look better. So the choice of a higher contrast is one thing. I don't know about this iris right here. It feels like it's in the wrong place a bit. Maybe like this would work better because it feels like it's squished with the perspective, but it's almost in the center of the eyeball. And this seems a bit more appropriate. And yeah, the stuff that wasn't in the reference, right? The meat part that's really extended like crazy, looking pretty cool. Yeah, I would shade it the same way everything else is shaded, obviously. And I will start with casting a strong, deep shadow in this area. Since this is a concave shape, and probably in here as well, another bump. That's where the hole in the skull going on for the eyeball. And so after a little bit of extra work, I went from this to this. Wow, this is looking very striking as I look at it now. So a couple of things I changed. First of all, I increased the dynamic range. I actually adapted the picture to the black environment. That's why it looks a lot more striking. Another thing, I introduced not just the same waxy color to the whole skin, but actually added some redness. And finally, I added the rim lighting from the top to support some of the details that disappear in the blackness. So pretty much that's the way things worked out overall. And same way as we had with the first submission, an issue of like using lines where you don't know how to define shapes otherwise, you know? If you erase the line, it will just disappear overall. You never have to do it. Never. You can always, like if you have an issue of not being able to erase an outline, that means you're not defining values precisely enough. Think about which angles change, like this part obviously needs to be darker than this plane, so they will easily differentiate from each other and you don't have to add that line. So pretty much that's exactly what I did. It's really messy and fast, but generally the idea is there. Stuff in here as well, like there's so much like just outlines, but really this plane is facing more in here and that one is turning away. If you have a line, it means there's some kind of plane ending and another one starting, and there's almost no chance they're at the same angle. So one of them will be at least a little bit darker than the other one. If you just keep that in mind and maybe study some photos to see how exactly of a difference that really makes, that little change, it's a lot of the times very subtle, but it's enough and it's just fine to go with very subtle changes sometimes. So yeah, I went around starting with shading down all the planes that I really felt like had no reason to be lit. Added some stronger shading on the concave shapes of the eyeball sockets. And yeah, also another thing that I did with the hair eyebrows and eyelashes and the hair on the head, everywhere. Try to stylize, try to group bits of hair together instead of literally painting every single tiny hair. That's ridiculous. It doesn't look like a painting because of that. Like any kind of detail, be it a hair or a nose or a hand, all of it needs to talk to each other. It needs to be defined in the same language. Overall, just try to group things together the way a sculptor does when they try to visualize hair. They don't do it like this. They group it in shapes. When we paint, especially in digital, we can make it a lot more detailed and precise, but we still need to go, like we need to start with these bigger shapes to make everything make sense. That's really important, because this hair, like this eyebrow, it literally just doesn't make sense because you didn't translate it as an artist into making sense. I hope that makes sense. Next patient. Vic. Hi there, Vic. Vic is the administrator on my Discord server, and he's also the last submission of today. So let's congratulate Vic, I don't know. Once more, good day to you, my friend. I hope you're healthy and doing well. Thank you, I am. This cap hurts a little bit because it's too small for my giant head. But other than that, everything's great. That's an overpaint I did of my own artwork from 2 years ago. I'm happy with how it turned out, but it seems to lack some spice. And I can't pinpoint what exactly that is. Maybe the color or the overall composition is boring, or a combination of both. Yeah, this was actually a very interesting thing about composition. Let's have a look. Alright, Vic, so I would say the picture is overall almost perfect. It's just a little bit about the design decision and then maybe the lack of contrast, at least somewhere. But one thing about the design, I would say that what's boring about the picture is just how even the spaces between the high contrast, like main trees are, you know? They're like all even, which is a common mistake when you like don't make sure you don't do it. That's usually the way things will turn out. Now, I can see that this tree has the stronger contrast than the other ones. It's just like this really strong contrast of a tree being close and then immediately much further, much more distant trees in the back. I would actually go ahead, like this is gonna butcher the picture so much, but I would literally put this tree maybe like here. And it would be the main thing. Even though you don't have like a plan to have a main tree, because you want to just paint a forest, which is kind of a questionable goal, to be honest, you know? What does it mean to just paint a forest? You never just paint a forest. It needs to be, you know, a place with something special about whatever's going on in it, you know? And you define those special things and you focus your composition around them. Because in here, like if I would take a photo standing in a place like this, I would probably find like a bit of a different angle or a different cropping, like maybe I would move the picture from here to like over there or something, just to have that rule of thirds or something going on, you know? So this is one way to do it, and this way we'll have an interesting kind of a break in the pattern, because we'll have like two trees really close to each other and maybe another distant tree, like the only one that would be actually visible in there as a strong contrast tree. It would be like giving us certain space in here. And to support the whole idea of having this tree as the focal point, why not increase the contrast on it a little bit? Since you obviously intentionally wanted to have this very foggy atmosphere in the picture, I won't like push it any darker than this, but at least this amount of contrast I think the picture deserves. Otherwise it feels like an old Instagram filter, or, you know, just something wrong with the picture with how narrow the dynamic range is. And just a little bit to support that contrast on this side, but not as much. So yeah, this is a really important thing about the rhythm in the picture, and yours is like a textbook case of that situation. Usually whenever they talk about the rhythm, they make an example of trees and when they look boring, when there's even spaces between them, and how to make it more interesting by just changing the spacing. Also, like changing the width. I would make this tree maybe thicker than the other ones. So that's also a thing. And that immediately after it, there's like a noticeably thinner tree. It all makes the eye going like, wow, that's interesting. Things are different. And maybe increase the aerial perspective a bit behind the main tree, like continue whatever we accidentally got in there over here. And now it's like a very interesting effect with volumetric going behind this darker tree. And now it's actually like, now you know why you're looking at the picture, you know? Oh, interesting. And everything else goes later. And yeah, aside from that, like the little technical parts I really like. I like the brushwork, I like the way it's consistent and how details really blend one into another. And I really like the way you did the grass, this brushwork, and by the way, the design of how, you know, different spots of grass look different, where somewhere we see some of the ground underneath and here there's some puddles and everything. It's looking really nice, really pleasant textures of just these masses of details. Really like that. The only thing I'm asking for is to just, you know, reorder the bigger things in the picture to make it more interesting to begin with. You know, the beginning of the picture, when you don't see any details, this is more interesting than this. And here, almost like the character should be standing in here, or maybe like this crow or whatever the bird it is was supposed to be the focal point, but it's too tiny, it doesn't really work that way, you know? And it feels like there's an empty space for something important, but it didn't come here yet, or something like that. And this way I make like the forest the main character of the picture. I actually want to go ahead and find that example with the forest for the rhythm. There you go, this is it. Only found it in Russian. This is a Russian textbook of sorts for drawing. So this is like the boring example. Then we change the thickness of the trees, it gets a bit more interesting. Then we also vary the spaces between them. And finally, we also vary the positioning of the trees in the distance from the camera. And now it's like the most interesting composition you can get out of just completely simple row of the trees. So yeah, I guess this is it. That was the only thing that felt wrong about the picture. One thing I would just mention is that it's pretty noticeable that the color variation in the picture is done in a separate layer, in like color blending mode, I guess, or something. It's noticeable that this is a separate brushwork from the actual brushwork that was defining values. Well, it's not a mistake, and you know, it may be its own thing. If you're going for more of a traditional and consistent art style, it's best to go for, you know, achieving this kind of look by really making brushstroke with colorful different like decisions right away. I think you generally made the picture colorful right away, but it didn't have the color variation at first, and then you added it on top as a fix. In that regard, I mean, if it's a fix, it's a thing, you know, but then I would, after I merge everything together, I would actually grab the colors and, you know, make it work together so it would really feel legit. Maybe add a little bit of extra details or some kind of texture there in the back by grabbing these colors so it would feel more in place instead of looking like a little bit of a chromatic glitch in a video, you know? So yeah, that's one little thing. So yeah, that was about it. I really think that from the distance it works out much better. And in the close-up, with the way you work with the details, I think you got it yourself, Vic. So thank you for your submission, and to the rest of you guys as well, thank you so much for a very interesting variety of submissions today. It was a lot of fun. You guys are so awesome, always sending me really interesting stuff to work with. Hope I was helpful. I don't think everything turned out that great, but some stuff were quite the bangers. If any of you guys want me to overpaint your picture like this, the link to my Patreon page is in the end of this video. You become my patron in the overpaint tier, submit the picture with the message, I read the message and overpaint the picture. But for now, this is it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! 9 submissions this time. Again, what a coincidence. But I actually made it work much better because I'm working on the submissions throughout the whole month as they get submitted. So there was no rush and I took my time with all of them. Works out pretty well.